Another subject that I want to touch upon, again, not much work has been done in this, is what I would call diasporic life cycles. I have been wondering about this, and my own work in this area suggests that every diaspora goes through a period of development. Initially, when they go and settle down, they tend to send money to their deserving relatives and friends. There is a lot of flow of money of this kind, and that lasts for some time. But once they have established themselves in their new homelands, and this they do by creating a secure asset base, they begin to participate in formal charity and developmental work. I was talking to a member of the Indian diaspora community, and he told me that working with his colleagues, he was able to raise, and the amount that he mentioned was an incredibly large amount, $600 million, within a matter of a few months, which went into the founding of this institute in Hyderabad, which has become one of the world's finest institutions. It was apparently a diasporic initiative. The third part of the life cycle is when assets have been created, assets begin to generate incomes, and those who own those assets have choices where to put these incomes. A large number of diasporas, and again, we heard from Prem Khanna and Parag Khanna and other people that a lot of investments are now being made, not only by the Indians, but also by the Chinese. And my work on Latin America suggests that all this kind of investment is also being done by the Central Americans and the Mexicans working in the United States. This is the third stage when diaspora communities begin to put money into their erstwhile homelands. They do it not for reasons of sentimentality. They do it because they know those countries well. They know the opportunities, they know the bureaucratic processes, and it is easier for them to do work in this area. When I was looking after the World Bank's China program, I went around meeting some of the Chinese diasporas in Hong Kong and in Singapore, in Taiwan, and so on. And the World Bank provided them with some guarantees and brought back some of these people into China. The Chinese diaspora were the first to lead the wave of investment, and it was only once that they had indicated that China is a place where the private sector could work that other people followed. Now, some of this has begun to happen in India, much more so than is the case in other diasporas. The fourth stage arrives when diasporas mature, when people get old. And as you know, those of you who live in the United States, old age care is expensive. People can get very lonely, and people do move back sometimes, if they don't have too many grandchildren, I guess, in order to get better health care, better living environment, and some of that movement starts. It can be quite large, as has happened in the case of some of the Latin American diasporas, but it has also begun to affect the South Asian diaspora. So you see these four life cycle movements in the lives of diasporas, and it is worth understanding these in order to predict and also influence by policy work some of what these people could do. Now, let me talk about how can the South Asia diaspora give a helping hand to their homelands. Not all large countries, no matter how impressive are their economic potential, will succeed unless they embed their economies in that of the region to which they belong. This was done by the United States in North America, by Brazil in southern cone of Latin America, by China in East Asia. The most important example of regional integration, of course, is that of the formation and evolution of the European Union. The countries of South Asia carrying large burdens of history on their shoulders, have been unable to integrate their economies. Here, the South Asian diasporas, with about 50 million people scattered in many continents, can help. Most of these communities work well with one another outside the boundaries of their homelands. They can bring those experiences to promote regional development in South Asia. And in this context, I might just mention a few numbers, which those who have heard me on the subject have found rather intriguing. I would suggest that the South Asian diasporas stand at an important crossroads. They are no longer made up of low-skilled workers needed in rich countries where the locals are not prepared to do the work that demands hard physical labor. Even the older diasporas that were formed by blue-collar workers are now drawing people with well-developed skills from the large human pool available in South Asia. Some of the newer diasporas from South Asia were formed by professionals in disciplines such as economics, engineering, accounting, information technology, and health sciences. The per capita income of these people are much more than that of the local populations. The South Asian diaspora in the United States probably has 4 million people, and income per head of $60,000. That would give them a combined income of $240 billion, of which a relatively large proportion, perhaps as much as 30%, is being saved. As we know from the life cycles of other diasporas, the bulk of this saving initially goes into creating economic assets in the adopted countries. With about $70 billion available every year for investment, the South Asian diasporas should have assets of over $1.3 trillion in the US economy. This resource provides also a permanent source of income of about $100 billion a year. Essentially, the point for mentioning these numbers is that there is an enormous amount of income as well as wealth that's available to the members of these communities. Could this be mobilized for the benefit of their homeland? The answer is yes. And this is where a country like Singapore could have a very, very profound impact. I would suggest that Singapore does a few things, and if it does those things, it would have a very positive impact on making diaspora communities as the spearhead communities for bringing better economic integration in South Asia. One, I think the Singaporean authorities should relax their immigration regime so that there is greater back and forth flow of people from various parts of the diasporas into and out of Singapore. Second, I think it should use some of their wealth funds, government-owned wealth funds like Temasek and other institutions, to provide resources, matching funds perhaps, for doing regional projects. And by regional projects, I mean grids that extend from India and India to Pakistan, Bangladesh to India, and so forth. Development of railway projects, development of roads that link these economies. There are lots of opportunities that can be done in the context of what economists call PPP, which is private-public partnership. And folks in Singapore, particularly in the government, could encourage that. And finally, a somewhat novel idea, which when I was at the World Bank, we tried in a couple of places with great success, is to use government guarantees in order to invite investment, which is shy of going into difficult places. And some of the countries in South Asia, particularly my own country, Pakistan, at this point is a very, very difficult country to invest in. Government guarantees could provide the comfort that diaspora communities may be looking for in order to move into these countries with their capital, with their skills, and then add to the rate of growth of economic development and bettering human life. Thank you very much.